Good evening and welcome to Aloud at Central Library. A pleasure to see you here tonight for a panel of wonderful LA writers, distinguished LA writers. I think this is a historic occasion. I'm Louise Steinman, the program director for the Library Foundation of Los Angeles, which presents all of these free Aloud programs here at Central Library. What does it mean to be a writer in Los Angeles, 3,000 miles from the traditional hub of publishing? What has it meant in the past? What does it mean now? What are the advantages? How does one's lineage, both familial and literary, figure into one's view of oneself as a Los Angeles writer? These are just some of the questions we'll look at in tonight's panel, From the Outside Looking In, Writers Finding Their Place in Los Angeles. The moderator for tonight's panel is my esteemed colleague, David L. Ulin, a book critic for the Los Angeles Times. David is the author, most recently, of The Lost Art of Reading, Why Books Matter in a Distracted Time, and oh, is it distracted, we are so distracted. He's currently teaching in the USC Masters of Professional Writing program. He's also my partner in crime in curating this little mini-series within Aloud for Pacific Standard Time, which I'm sure most of you know is a Getty initiative, involves many, many institutions, and looks at art in Los Angeles from 1945 to 1980. We will bleed over those borders, but we are part of that conversation. This series has included an evening with Joan Didion at the historic Bibiana Cathedral, a conversation with Lawrence Weschler, and a forthcoming event with poets Wanda Coleman and Lewis McAdams on April 12th, titled Concrete Rivers, the Emotional Topography of Los Angeles, moderated by the great Lynell George, right here. So our panel tonight is made up of a stellar group of writers. All but one, you'll have to guess which one, was born here in Los Angeles. They write in a variety of forms, and they put their work out into the world in various ways. Now I'm going to make some very brief introductions, and then we will get going. Bernard Cooper is the author of Maps to Anywhere, A Year of Rhymes, Truth Serum, a collection of stories, Guess Again, and his most recent book, The Bill from My Father. He's the recipient of many awards, including the O. Henry Prize. His work appears in many anthologies and magazines, including Harper's, the New York Times Magazine. He teaches creative nonfiction at Bennington College, and he has a wonderful dog with pointed ears named Alice, Gail Collins always mentions Mitt Romney's dog. This is so different because Alice is fantastic. Joyce Farmer, who is down there next to David, is best known for co-creating the Tits and Clits, oh boy, I knew I was going to trip over that. Tits and Clits comics anthology in the 1970s, a feminist response to the rampant misogyny in underground comics. Her most recent work is a graphic memoir, Special Exits. Lynell George, who is right here to Bernard's left, is an award-winning journalist who, for more than 20 years, has covered Los Angeles and its environs as a staff writer for both the Los Angeles Times and the LA Weekly. She has studied Los Angeles through many prisms. She's the author of No Crystal Stair, African Americans in the City of Angels, a collection of reportage and essays drawn from her reporting, and she currently teaches journalism at Loyola Marymount University. Marisela Norte is the recipient of the Ben Reitman Award from San Diego State University for Peeping Tom Tom Girl, a wonderful collection of poetry and prose. Her poems are featured on MTA buses in the Out of Your Window project, and they were recently selected among the 10 best transit poems in the world by The Atlantic. She is a bus writer, you'll hear about that, and she continues to document life in Los Angeles in words and through photography via public transportation. And Michael Tolkin, the author of 4 novels, The Player, Among the Dead, Under Radar, and The Return of the Player. Michael won the Writers Guild of America Award for his screenplay for The Player and has also directed the movies The Rapture and The New Age. So I turn it over to David. Take it away, and please enjoy the evening tonight. Thank you.
Thanks. So as Louise said, we're going to start with a series of small, generally 3-minute readings from the various people on the panel, just to give you a taste of what they're doing, and then we're going to have a conversation amongst the 6 of us, and then we're going to turn it over to you guys for some questions, in keeping with sort of the idea of being a writer in Los Angeles. And I do consider, I have this very wide definition of writing, meaning that if it involves words on paper in any way, then you're a writer. But in keeping with a wide definition, or my sense of writing in Los Angeles as an act of coloring outside the lines, we're going to throw that Pacific Standard Time temporal frame out the window, so we can talk about work between 1945 and 1980, or between 1985 and 1990, or even up to the present. So we'll sort of see where this conversation goes. Hopefully, it will become a kind of group endeavor rather than will become a collective mind, a hive mind, rather than just a series of individual minds. But we'll see how that goes. I'm just going to kind of take the path of least resistance and start with Bernard, and we'll kind of slide around this little semi-horseshoe shape and read, and then we'll jump in. So Bernard.
Great. Welcome, everyone. I think the only thing you need to know in the way of setup about this is that I am a native of Los Angeles, and I went to LeConte Junior High School on Bronson Avenue, and this is about that period of time. The Santa Ana wind blew relentlessly the night of Debbie Coburn's party, careening down the slopes of the Hollywood Hills, shaking the road signs and stoplights in its path. As I walked down Beechwood Avenue, trees thrashed, surrendered their leaves, and carob pods bombarded the pavement. The sky was a deep but luminous blue, the air hot, abrasive, electric. I had to squint in order to check the number of the Coburn's apartment, a 3-story building with glitter embedded in its stucco walls. From down the hall, I could hear the plaintive strains of little Anthony's "I Think I'm Going Out of My Head." Debbie answered the door, bedecked in a dress of polka dots and stripes. "Op art," she proclaimed, turning in a circle. Reflections from the swimming pool in the courtyard, its surface ruffled by wind, shuddered over the ceiling and walls. A dozen of my classmates were seated on the sofa or huddled together in corners, their whispers full of excited imminence, their bodies barely discernible in the dim light. Drapes flanking the sliding glass doors bowed out with every gust of wind, and it seemed that the room might lurch from its foundations and sail with its cargo of silhouettes into the hot October night. Grady was the last to arrive. He tossed a 6-pack of beer into Debbie's arms, barreled toward me, and slapped my back. His hair was slicked back with Vitalis, lacquered furrows left by the comb. The wind hadn't shifted a single hair. "You ready?" he asked, leering into the darkened room. "You bet," I lied. Once the beers had been passed around, Debbie provoked everyone's attention by flicking on the overhead light. "Okay," she called, "find a partner." This was the blunt command of a hostess determined to have her guests aroused in an orderly fashion. Everyone blinked, shuffled about, and grabbed a member of the opposite sex. Sheila Garabedian landed beside me, entirely at random, though I wanted to believe she was driven by passion. Her timid smile giving way to plain fear as the light went out. Nothing for a moment but the heave of the wind and the distant banter of dogs. I caught a whiff of Sheila's perfume, as tangy and sweet as Hawaiian punch. I probed her face with my own, grazing the small scallop of an ear, a velvety temple, and though Sheila's trembling made me want to stop, I persisted with my mission until I found her lips, as tightly sealed as a private letter. I held my mouth over hers and gathered her shoulders closer, resigned to the possibility that, no matter how long we stood there, Sheila was too scared to kiss me back. Still, she exhaled through her nose, and I listened to the squeak of every breath as though it were a sigh of pleasure. Diving within myself, I monitored my heartbeat and respiration, trying to will stimulation into being. And all the while an image intruded, an image of Grady erupting from our pool, rivulets of water sliding down his chest. "Change," shouted Debbie, switching on the light. Sheila thanked me, pulled away, and continued her routine of gracious terror with every boy throughout the evening. It didn't matter whom I held, Margaret Sims, Betty Vernon, Elizabeth Lee. My experiment was a failure. I continued to picture Grady's wet chest, and Debbie would bellow, "Change," with such fervor. It could have been my own voice, my own incessant reprimand.
Lynell?
I'm going to read part of an essay. I know Marisela and I were having a little conversation on Facebook about, oh, what do we read? What do we read about LA? LA's so big. How do you contain LA? And I too am a native, so I'm going to read a piece from an essay, part of a piece from an essay I wrote about being a native. Okay. I've been told it must have been strange to grow up here. Strange, they say, because there are no seasons, or because there is no center, or it's not a real city. But now I read between the lines and think, strange, because to live here and successfully acclimate, people often throw off many layers of convention. Once they relieve themselves of the weight of abstract commitments and expectations, they are suddenly liberated to wander away from a more recognizable and responsible adult self. That gauntlet thrown down to normal is what kicks up resentment, challenges a life that doesn't ask questions or stretch out to explore. I often tell people that Los Angeles makes no sense if you talk about it out loud. The land of slow float car chases and girls with mercurochrome hair. So my LA exists in my mind in fragments, a conflation of time, space, and reality. It involves things that can't be put on postcards or projected on widescreens. I'm uncertain when I first realized that my existence here was so far different from how the outside world characterized it. But I began collecting, honing my own defining details way back, as if I knew I'd need to. Back when a 30-minute drive could throw you out into the sticks under a spill of stars, smelling eucalyptus and mustard. It was rustic, a term I equated with a sudden presence of coyotes and skunks, or the slapdash souvenirs of the journey decor found within the homes of canyon dwellers, or simply the barefoot meander. Rustic, I later came to understand, was a polite euphemism used by decorum-bound Easterners and Southerners to describe the haphazard existence we had jerry-rigged for ourselves. Rustic was this desert marked by summer days with blade-sharp heat that would suddenly soften, the ocean breeze running in for a rescue. The reward on days like this was the vast glittering canyon view at the very moment when the hills unexpectedly stepped aside in the turn of the road. But I know those bits and pieces have sunk quick and deep into my consciousness. I live in this city with a healthy mixture of infatuation and infuriation. It's a place where the pattern of life can be disturbed just as easily by a location shoot shutting off several crucial city blocks at rush hour as by a riot, long put on simmer, now coming to a boil. I sometimes marvel at how easily we learn to fall into place, to adjust to what at first looks or feels absurd by assigning some idea or out-of-era explanation for what many would find utterly inexplicable. Not long after 1992's much euphemized insurrection, riot, revolt, response, or my favorite, unpleasantries, I was moderating a Sunday afternoon program at the downtown library, right here on this stage. A respected jazz musician's oral history of the dapper days of Central Avenue and the evolution of West Coast style. Everything was in place, the auditorium to capacity, the sound system piping in jazz sides of the era. Suddenly, moments before our microphones went live, the woman who had organized the program darted out from the wings, placing a sheet of paper into my hands. On it were instructions to give to the assembled guests that the gunshots, tire screeches, and explosions they might hear outside were not another riot, just high-tech FX for a new film starring Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro. Nobody would be alarmed, and nobody was. Well-versed, whatever else was erupting around us, we simply pressed forward, as so many of us already had long ago. That's just it. I grew up in a place of new beginnings, the place where people start from scratch. I grew up hearing about the road here, the whys here, and ultimately the frustrations and ruin of here. Too tall in order for even paradise. What happens when the possibilities run out? And what if, like me, you are already here? It's an existence that constantly sets up interior conflict, laid out black and white on the page. Los Angeles is both all that is real and all that is not. It builds it up and tears it down. It raises expectations and strikes them as efficiently as a set. And though you want to protect what stands before you, fragile as it is, you know it wasn't meant to last. It's fleeting and temporary. The glue, anticipation, and memory.
Michael?
This is from my new book, so this is actually world debut. And the book is complete science fiction. It's completely set in L.A., so what I'm reading is the only part of the book that's not about L.A. Because for some reason, I couldn't find anything that would reduce it to 3 minutes, that I could get down to 3 minutes that was self-contained. All you need to know in this is when the narrator is a biker named Red Wings, and you can go home and look at what Red Wings means and why a biker would call himself Red Wings. Good, okay. So the reference is a reference to Shannon Squire. Shannon Squire is a resurrected pop star who has the world's most famous tattoo, and her tattoo is done and signed by a Russian tattoo artist named Smersh. Smersh is a reference to From Russia with Love, Smersh Spionim, Death Despise. Red Wings Smersh, and Red Wings has a Smersh tattoo, and this is the story of how he got it. Red Wings kept a journal of his adventures on that trip, and by what would have been called a miracle if anyone still believed in God, the 10-page journal, printed for circulation among the members of his club, survived because he'd given it to his rehab doctor, you don't need to know, who left it with Red Wings before disappearing into the void of NK3, also you don't need to know. This is the story of how I got my Smersh tat, how I wrote to Vladimir Smersh Sorokin in Moscow with the help of Beria, a Russian brother from the Moscow chapter, who I met at the funeral of the treasurer of the San Rafael CA chapter, may he ride free forever, who translated my request. I sent the word that I very much admired the Smersh tattoo he had performed on the back of the singer Shannon Squire, and I so admired the craftsmanship and the meaning of Death Despise that if it were at all possible that I could come to Moscow and have him tattoo nothing but that word, his name, across my shoulders, I would pay what he asked. Smersh sent back an email not too long after I sent mine, also translated by Brother Beria, and therefore he could tell me, you come, I do, 500 euros. By the way, I thought he meant $ instead of euro sign, but he preferred the euro sign because it was worth more. It's only money. Thus began my adventure of first acquiring a United States passport, which was of course made difficult because of affiliation with a well-known 1% motorcycle club, which is not a gang. As we say, this is not a criminal organization. This is an organization with some criminals in it. And that's a distinction I was able to make somehow with the TSA to get my passport. Actually, there was someone who you could say was a friend of ours in the TSA, and it was somehow taken care of by her. Then it was off by Delta Airways to Amsterdam, Holland, where I was met at the airport by a dozen brothers who had also brought a Harley Sportster for me, which normally I make fun of as a bike for women, although it's a fine bike, as my ride proved. But I was proud to join them on a great run across the flatland of Holland and then to the clubhouse in Old Amsterdam. What a trippy place. Legal hash. Well, time could not be wasted, and after we partied in Amsterdam, 3 of my Dutch brothers joined me on a trip from Amsterdam to Moscow, which took but 3 days. It blew my mind that the ride from Amsterdam to Warsaw took a total of 12 hours of actual riding time, which we did in a day and a half. 12 hours! I can say that I finally understand the blitzkrieg. Europe is large on the map and small on the ground. And then another few days of easy riding to Moscow through Belarus, where I could just imagine the partisans in the forest if I just squinted my eyes. Think of it, so close the distances between these famous cities and places, and yet how many years did it take the Russians to defeat the Germans and get from point A in Moscow to point B in Berlin? I salute the soldiers on both sides of that mighty conflict. Mighty Mother Russia, I wish I had time to visit what had been Stalingrad to see where the epic battle took place, but I was there to get my tattoo. Smersh Sorokin could not have been a more regular decent guy, which was not a surprise because in my experience, the real true artists, with some exceptions, hello Bono, you pretentious motherfucker, that I have met have been easy to talk to and not just about themselves. Do you hear me, Bono? Now, Vladimir, that man did not drink, not ever, nor take any drugs, because he wanted a steady hand and nothing fuzzy ever between his inspiration and his amazing touch. He also was a man not to gossip, and when I asked him about Shannon Squire, he told me gently that just as he would never talk about me to anyone, he would not talk about her. A true Russian gentleman. I was surprised to see that he used the same inks as my tattoo artist in San Bernardino, CA uses, but I don't know why it should have surprised me. This truly is one world.
Marisela?
Thank you. Thank you, Louise, for inviting me to the table. With all due respect to Joan Didion, I like to sit next to someone I don't know and may never see again. Better than I like sitting behind the wheel of a car, most likely alone. Los Angeles doesn't need another driver out on the streets, and call me superstitious, but I learned how to drive in a 1971 Pinto in the Biba-lipped T-Rex meets Al Green teenage summer of 1972. I asked myself, just how would I maneuver gear shifts, gas pedals, while adjusting seam stockings and rear views of Whittier Boulevard as a miniature pine tree air freshener sways back and forth in sleep-inducing arcs? Why have me behind the wheel when, through a bus window darkly, I am able to take poetic leaps and transport myself through the language of street corners, memory, imagination, and dreams of East LA days and Fellini nights? I still cross that bridge that links Whittier Boulevard to downtown Los Angeles. It is probably one of my favorite views of the city, and judging from the Blade Runner-esque black makeup I am wearing, I am on my way to meet my chums at Clifton's on 7th and Broadway before we work our way through another gallery party. This is 1984, back when artists could still afford the cheap rents around Rose and Traction. And it was just like that scene out of La Dolce Vita, where partygoers, us, held candelabra as we made our way through stairwells up to rooftops to get another view of this city. Back then, there was never any question about how and when I would be getting home. These days, I make sure to take that last sip before another unhappy hour comes to a close. Me, I'm still cruising the boulevard. There's a makeshift taqueria sandwiched between an eye clinic and a notary public on Whittier Boulevard, where families gather nightly to watch El Privilegio de Amar and Velo de Novia on a small TV set sitting on the hood of the owner's pickup truck. On several occasions, I've gotten off the bus to enjoy a couple of tacos and watch another long-suffering telenovela heroine weep through her waterproof mascara. The kids are all doing their homework, and I stand at the corner of Whittier and Lorena just to catch a glimpse of the downtown skyline. There is a comfort in knowing that the green sign on that skyscraper to the left brings back memories to East Angelinos. I like to think there's a kid riding on a bus somewhere who also thinks of it as his own Emerald City. Maybe he or she will be moved to pick up a pen and someday write a poem.
Joyce. Joyce is going to go up to the podium, and we have some audio visual, or some visual.
I'm concerned that it's hard to see and impossible to read. This is a story. I started a series of books with a partner called Tits and Clits in 1972, and the idea was that we had seen underground comics. There were no women's, well, there was only one or two women's underground comics at the time, and we felt that we had something to say about the incredible violence against women in 1972. So we started Tits and Clits, thinking of getting even with men, but deciding that that wasn't our way. We weren't in a revenge mode, and so we started looking at, well, Playboy and all these other magazines are showing women from a man's point of view, and we decided to show women's sexuality from a women's point of view. So we brought out menstrual pads, menstrual blood, just all kinds of things. Things that were very imaginative and really offended a lot of people. people were not accustomed to thinking of women and sex from a woman's point of view. And women were always worried about birth control. We have a different set of concerns than the men do. Pre-Viagra days, of course. And so we did this series of comics, and after the first one or two were done, we nearly got arrested for pornography. And I am not able to judge what is pornography, but one of the conditions of pornography, one of the definitions of pornography is to encourage prurient interest. What is that phrase? To bring about prurient thoughts in the reader. And as a judge said of somebody else's underground comic, this is too disgusting to have prurient, how do you say that word anyway? Prurient interest. It's too disgusting. And actually it was true. We were not trying to arouse anybody. We were just trying to tell it like it was. And this, in turn, aroused a lot of people, but we didn't know it. And so I spent a year not knowing if I was going to get arrested for doing this. It's a long story. This is the story about it. I did it for a book that was not in my Tits and Clits series. And this just shows some of the artwork. I'm supposed to read this to you, but frankly, I can't even read it from here. So you can see the artwork. We were worried about getting arrested. We went to the ACLU. The ACLU gave us a certain amount of advice, but they also told us that in order to prosecute their case on free speech grounds, that they would not be necessarily in our interest, so we needed our own lawyers. And fortunately, some lawyers magically appeared and did this for us. We didn't have a dime. I was a bail bondsman at the time and with a state license. Go figure. You work your way through college the way you get through college. And so I was worried about losing my California state license if I got arrested for a felony. And my friend was worried about losing her 2 daughters to her ex-husband if she was arrested for a felony. So we had plenty of worries. And this is the story of that near arrest. Some people actually, the bookstore owners who were selling our comics were arrested. And they did not get, the investigating officer bought the last issue of Tits and Clits for the investigation. So when they came back to arrest them, this is all in the small town of Laguna Beach, when they came back to arrest them, there was no evidence. So they grabbed all the other comic books, but they didn't get us. We were writing, publishing, selling, and whatever, 3 things in Laguna Beach, and it was a very easy arrest for the district attorney if they could catch the bookseller, then publishing, where they could get the publisher, which was us, and then they could get the writers, which was us. And so it was kind of a jewel of an arrest if they could do it, but they blew it by buying that last copy. Anyway, for a year I worried about white cars. And I worried because my son was about 15 and he was doing a certain amount of low-quality drugs, and he would leave them around the house. And I said, look, you know, there they are on the coffee table, and if somebody comes to the door, they can see in the window, and there I go. You know, you want to lose your mother to jail? Just, and you too, by the way, Bubby. So anyway. Yeah, this is the last 2 panels here. The final panel, 8, is where I'm talking to my son about getting real. And he just thought I was full of baloney. So anyway, this is the story. It shows a little bit of my artwork, but my artwork has moved on. And this was about middle of where I was learning to draw, so things are different now. The Tits and Clits series ended in 1987, but the fear of being arrested was my personal censorship. I could never be so imaginative and think of all these crazy women things that we were thinking of because I now had somebody looking over my shoulder every time I held a pen. It was an extreme lesson in how to cut off your own fingers. Censorship, we have many arguments against censorship, but for the actual artist, it just undoes you, unless you like going to jail. And since I'd been a bail bondsman, I'd seen the number of inside jails, and I really didn't care to try it myself. So that's it. Thank you. Oh, yes. One more thing. I do actually have a Los Angeles connection. My parents died in South Los Angeles in 1994, and a few years later I started writing their story of the downward spiral and their deaths, and my dad had a great sense of humor. So that is my current book, Special Exits, which has got nothing to do with Tits and Clits, and it is on the market now if anybody's interested. But I am born and raised Los Angeles, several generations, and so I guess that's why I was invited here. Thank you, everyone.
All I can say is I'm glad those days are behind us and there's no war on women's sexuality or contraception.
Nothing more to write about.
No. It's ancient history. So, so that's the work. I got to say, this is awesome. I'm totally psyched, and I actually would almost just want to sit here and listen to these people read some more. But we have a mandate to talk, so we'll do that. And what I would like to do is just sort of throw out a general question first, and then hopefully get more specific. But the general question is, what, if anything, is it about Los Angeles? I mean, in terms of how the city, I mean, obviously for those of you who grew up here, it's had an influence in some way. But in terms of doing work here, in terms of feeling freedom or lack of freedom, feeling engaged or marginalized, feeling like you're operating in conjunction with something or in opposition to something, what is it about Los Angeles? Does anyone, Michael, do you want to start?
I think things are beginning to change a little bit, but being a novelist in LA is a certain kind of internal exile, nationally. There's no literary mafia here the way there are in New York. You know, the New York Review of Books takes care of its writers, N+1 takes care of its writers, and champions them and supports them and criticizes the pricks from the other circles and sets up circuits that protect each other, and we don't have that here. I mean, I think the LA Review of Books, which is just starting, I've been to gatherings with more gatherings with writers and other writers in LA in the last couple of years than I have in the last 25, which is a healthy sign. Even things like this, you know, there's so I think that's changing, but we're still bound by validation from the East. And I think that LA writing is not East Coast writing. I think that's cruder. I don't think the concerns are at all the same. I mean, my new book is science fiction, and it's a really harsh book. It's not like anything I've written, and it's all about LA. And in trying to do something about LA, I think you take on a city, as you're describing, which is not like the East.
Anyone else want to jump in? I can call on you.
I want to say that when you're born and raised in Los Angeles, you don't have anything else to compare to.
Right.
So it's hard to answer your question.
Well, it grows out of your experience.
It is. I mean, to answer that question is a little bit like asking birds to talk about the trees they live in or something, because you do take it for granted. And I think if you are born a writer or somebody in the arts, wherever you live is a source of astonishment and provides you with material. I mean, I've always felt that there's a sense of anonymity in Los Angeles because it's kind of out of the way and people are looking often to other centers, which is both a blessing in a sense because you can kind of start from scratch and you don't feel that people are looking over your shoulder. On the other hand, there is a kind of double isolation, and it is odd to be a writer in Los Angeles because people instantly ask you if you're writing screenplays.
Right.
So you're kind of an exile from the world of Hollywood and from the sort of literary center of supposedly of the East Coast. But there are two sides to the same coin. There's something great about it, and also something one has to sort of work against a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's like there's that push and pull. I mean, you know, my word of the day, my word of most days is tension. So there is that tension between sort of, you know, that freedom it gives you, right, and also the sort of marginalization in some ways. You're always just simply the act of being a writer of poetry or prose or literary writer in Los Angeles marks you as an outsider, right, in some ways.
And try not driving.
And try not driving. I want to ask you about that. In fact, let's talk about that.
Oh, I didn't want to say something about this because as you were talking, I was thinking two things. One, being a native, I didn't think about it until I moved away, and I was living in San Francisco for a while. And I found myself defending LA all the time, and of course. And I thought, we like it up here. We don't talk bad about you. Why are you talking? But that was the first time I realized was living away from LA, was trying to figure out, well, how do I write about it when I lived, and that's when I really actually began writing about the city. But the other piece of that I was thinking about as you were talking, I have also found as a journalist, if you're writing about Los Angeles and you're trying to sell a piece about Los Angeles to a publication on the East Coast, they may say, if you're not writing about one of these different issues that they consider to be an LA issue or an LA theme, they'll say, oh, we don't want that. If it confirms what they know, they like it. But if it takes them a different place, like, no. And there was one piece I was working on about identity and race here and intersections, and I remember getting back a critique was, oh no, that's too coastal. You know, I'm like going, what does that mean? But it was like they didn't know what to do with it. So that's the other thing I find that I'm explaining this place that not a lot of people will understand still.
Right, or you know, a friend of mine who wrote a novel, turned it into a New York editor, and parts of it took place in the hills, and the editor said, LA is just flat.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Well, one of the things about working in Los Angeles is that you don't have a great burden of all these rules. I mean, if you're living in New York, you've got a lot of parties you go to and you're in the groove. But in Los Angeles, part of being a Los Angeles writer, I would think, it certainly is if you live in Laguna Beach, where I live, is that you don't have any peers around you, so you have to think the whole thing out by yourself, and you don't get any advice, and you just go with it. And I think that can give you a good basis for working it out and being true to yourself and doing some very interesting things because you're not following anybody else's rules.
Is that true? I mean, is that also true in the sense, I mean, you're sort of an outsider 3 times over in the way of...
3 times over,
right.
And I never even realized it because I didn't call myself a writer, for one thing. And I haven't lived in Los Angeles for years, but I am born and raised here, so I have a Los Angeles mentality, for what that's worth. And, yeah.
But I'm curious about, you know, in the 70s, you were saying you started Tits and Clits comics as a reaction to the misogyny of underground comics, right? Wasn't it, you know, which is a really sort of fundamental kind of subtext to late 60s, early 70s liberation politics, right? What did Stokely Carmichael say? The only position for a woman in the movement is prone, right? So you're operating against that as a construct. You're operating in underground comics, which is outside in its own way also.
Exactly. And plus, I had no education in being a feminist. I had gone to college, but I had taken a degree in classical languages, which is the farthest thing from feminism, and had been reading Ms. Magazine a bit, but Ms. didn't want to have anything to do with us because we were too weird. And so we did our own thing. But 3 times over is true.
Right. Marisela...
Punk rock, I love it. It is. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask you about the bus riders, because that's another form of, you know, of in a way, of inside-outside. It depends on how we look at the city, right? The city is perceived as an automotive city, as that Didion idea, right? A large part of life in Los Angeles is sitting alone in a car driving through neighborhoods that all look alike. But there's this whole other, I don't want to call it a subculture, because it is actually, I think, in a way, a kind of hidden dominant culture in a certain sense. But I wonder if you can talk about that, and also about writing from that point of view. I mean, again, sort of identifying your work with not just a city that's on the outside, but a side of the city that is often
Interior
seen that
city,
way. Yeah.
Well, it's just, I can't not do it. And as horrible as it is some days, I look forward to it every day. And I've been doing a lot of photography lately, a lot more. Lynell and I are planning our next photo trip, our first photo
Yes.
trip together. But there's a bus stop, my second bus stop of the day. From where I live to where I work, it's an hour and a half. It's sometimes 2 hours. So I might as well be going to Tijuana or to San Diego or somewhere, but I'm going to Wilshire and Fairfax. But it's the wait in between each bus. And at this particular bus stop, there's these beautiful agave plants against this very Frida cobalt blue brick wall. And every day I find something that sometimes I'd rather not find. Today I found a woman's camisole just hanging on one of the.
I saw that one. I saw that one this morning.
And I thought, is somebody's been following me and they're doing this on purpose. They're gaslighting me. They're going to drive me nuts because they leave these beautiful things. So sometimes I can't write about them and I have to just photograph them instead. So I think for me, I'm kind of making that shift right now of doing more visual work than I am actually writing. Did I even answer your? I know I didn't.
No,
but
but
let me
that's
go
okay.
back to about even getting on the bus. There's a guy clipping his nails to my left. And I'm thinking, really, this is where you're going to do your manscaping? Like, maybe it's me maybe that's okay to do. Everyone's on the phone now. I'm hearing everybody's very personal conversations that I'd rather not hear. So maybe clipping your nails, it's not such a big deal anymore. I don't know. But the things, I can't make them up, Dave. I'm telling you that
No, I know. I mean, I think that's the most, in that
Who
sense.
else doesn't drive? DJ Waldy, I found out,
I know
does
he's
not
never
drive
drove,
a car.
right?
He's never driven.
And
Why isn't he here?
Richard Rayner also
También,
does not drive and never has driven.
I did a talk with Richard and DJ and myself.
It was the non-driving writers coalition.
It was. I'm now in that club. There's 3 members now. But we were at David Kippen's Libros Schmibros at the Hammer. And somebody asked him, like, where does he live? Like in Downey or something? No, he lives Lakewood.
Waldy lives in Lakewood,
Right,
yeah.
Lakewood,
yeah.
all right.
That's like 3 days. You think if you get on no. If you get on a local, it's the wayward bus. It really, you don't know where. And the thing is, if you have a notebook, if you have a pen, just go. Just go. And not everything, let me tell you, that comes out in that notebook ever makes it in here. But I just feel like I have to keep writing it down.
Now, I'm
It'll
interested.
go somewhere.
I hope so, yeah.
I'm interested in sort of ways that things develop or how people became writers. I mean, Bernard, you started out as a visual artist, right, at Cal Arts.
Right, well, I started, this is kind of a sad admission, but I started off as a conceptual artist.
Oh,
I
okay.
went to Cal Arts.
That means you just sat around and thought about things. Imagine the clouds
until
surfing.
I was paralyzed and couldn't do anything. But yeah, it was I actually went to Cal Arts right after the schools opened, and it was initially Walt Disney's dream, in a sense, as a farm from which to cultivate animators. But after his death, it sort of held the promise of a new avant-garde school in America, a new Bauhaus, and avant-garde art really predominated the whole institution, and conceptual art was all the rage in the 1970s. So for me, it seems like an odd step to go from the visual arts to writing, although one of the great writers, Flannery O'Connor, once said that the sense of sight, and especially listening to Marisela talk about, the camisole on the agave, that is a really crucial sense for a writer. And also going from conceptual art, which was largely text-based, to writing seemed much more logical to me at the time than it did to other people. It seemed like I was really switching gears. But even the description of the stucco apartment house that I just read was informed a lot by a book by Ed Ruscha that was a kind of document of stucco apartment buildings along Fountain Avenue, I believe. So it all, it all intermingles and hopefully adds up to something, even when it seems in the process that you're just recording odds and ends.
Michael, is that your experience between sort of novel writing and movie work? I mean, you've written films, directed films, as well as the novels. Sometimes they relate, a couple of novels about Hollywood, a couple not, some adaptations of your own, or adapting the player. But can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, it's interesting. The frustration. I'll start over. I adapted one. I've written 4 novels. I adapted one.
Right.
The other 3, I didn't sell. There was some interest, but I wasn't interested in selling them. And there wasn't a review in the world after the first book